You guys know that I love my Saturn, and I can talk all day long about the games that are often considered the system's best. Most top 10s, hell most top 25s, tend to contain the same games, making many of these conversations reek of deja vu. In this episode, we are going to talk about some damn good Sega Saturn games that don't get the attention some of the other games on the system command. Reasons for this vary. Sometimes a game simply doesn't have the visual appeal many gamers prefer, and sometimes it's because it gets lost in a genre so thoroughly dominated by the more popular games in it. Heck, sometimes I don't know why a good game gets overlooked. I have 10 of these kinds of games for you today, so let's take a look at Unwept, Unhonored, and Unsung on the Sega Saturn. The first game on the list is Zero Divide, The Final Conflict. Released on the Saturn in late 1997 and developed by Zoom, this is a continuation of the robotic fighting game series that started on the Sony PlayStation. The first thing you'll notice about this one is that it runs in the Saturn's high-resolution mode first seen in Virtua Fighter 2. The second thing you'll pick up on is the fact that it also plays just like Virtua Fighter. And I'm not talking about it plays similar or reminds you of Virtua Fighter, I mean it plays exactly like it. So much so I'm shocked Sega didn't sue the balls off these guys for lifting their gameplay so brazenly. This ends up being a good thing for fans of this type of gameplay however, and Zero Divide here is a really solid game for it. The abstract visuals also have a unique quality about them, especially the robots and solid texturing used to give them detail. Stages often have 3D elements to them such as walls and barriers surrounding you, each as crazy colored as the combatants. Some arenas even have parallax scrolling in the background, something that works surprisingly well with 3D foregrounds. Gameplay, aside from being a carbon copy of Virtua Fighter, pits armor-clad robots against one another. As each fight wears on, the armor is broken away, leaving your character weaker and weaker. I think Zero Divide's greatest sin is the simple fact it's lost in a genre that is a mile deep with heavy hitters considered some of the best games of that generation. I still think this game stands on its own however. While it clearly rips off the Virtua Fighter series in regards to moves and feel, the crazy art design and truly epic boss fights give it a life of its own. It was only released in Japan, and prices for this rarely go above the $30 mark. I've even seen it for half that from time to time.
Get set. Ready? Go!
Mystaria, The Realms of Lore is a turn-based strategy RPG that released early in the Saturn's life, landing in Japan as Riglord Saga in the summer of 1995. Microcabin developed this one, the same guys behind the 3DO RPG Lucian's Quest. In the world of Saturn RPGs, Mystaria is rarely spoken of with titans like Shining Force 3, Panzer Dragoon Saga, and Dragon Force soaking up all the limelight. This is a shame because this game is actually quite excellent. The story of this one is simple. The evil war mage Bane has taken over the peaceful kingdom of Queensland, and Prince Aragon is out to stop him. You'll gain new allies as the game progresses, until you finally have the strength to take on Bane and win your kingdom's freedom back and rescue your mother. Mystaria's lack of visual prowess is evident from the moment you begin a new campaign. The frame rate isn't smooth, and its pre-rendered sprites lack visual detail. Simply put, it's not a very pretty game. But what it lacks in visuals, it more than makes up for in content and gameplay. The turn-based battles are long and detailed, offering solid challenge right from the very first scenario. The menu system seems overwhelming at first, but you quickly come to terms with your options and how to navigate them. Each character only starts out with a handful of magics and attacks based on their class, but this quickly expands to dozens of moves that only serve to deepen its rather impressive gameplay. The enemies you face grow in complexity and challenge as well, often having all the powers you do to try to stop your advancement. After the game's English release in the West, Sega was asked to change the name because of its similarity to the Dungeons & Dragons name Mystaria, prompting Sega to re-release Mystaria as Blazing Heroes. It's the same game with just a few name changes to satisfy the new release. This one has seen a slight surge in popularity in recent years, but is still criminally underrated in my opinion. Its popularity in Japan was at least good enough for it to see a direct sequel, Riglord Saga 2, in late 1996, which did not get an English translation at all. Next up is Black Dawn, a 3D helicopter shoot-'em-up released in early 1996 by Virgin Interactive and developed by Point of View, the team behind the Saturn port of Mortal Kombat Trilogy. The arcade-style missions are pretty simple to understand, mostly giving you tasks such as blowing stuff up or rescuing hostages. Despite the early Polygon engine having in-your-face draw-in, this one otherwise looks and runs pretty good. You have multiple camera options to change how it plays, from first person to third person, and even a bunch of controller options so you can better move around to suit your style. It even supports the Saturn's mission stick peripheral. The story hits all your typical counterterrorism notes, with bad guys that need killing and all that entails. It reminds me of a 3D version of something like Soviet Strike, even down to picking up weapons and items on the battlefield. This was ported from the PlayStation original and holds up remarkably well against that version of the game. It's cheap too, often hovering between the $15 and $30 mark depending on condition and completeness. It's the kind of game you sink 15 minutes into every so often and get some real enjoyment out of it. If you are a fan of 2D games like Choplifter, this 3D take on that style of gameplay should appeal brilliantly. The Lost Vikings 2, Norse by Northwest, is a 2D puzzle platformer that follows the misadventures of a group of Vikings trying desperately to get back to their ship after being inexplicably kidnapped by some dude just wanting to mess around with them. Each Viking has his own unique powers and abilities, and you'll meet up with a werewolf and dragon who will help you on your journey. Gameplay here is set up so each stage has items and objectives that must be completed based on each Viking's ability. This means that you need to figure out when and where to use each one to proceed. For example, Eric the Viking has a high jump and the ability to swim, making him useful in those situations. Olaf the Viking can float for a limited time and even shrink down to get into small places. As you uncover more of the world with these abilities, puzzles get harder and more complex, challenging you to use each power in new ways. The one area where this game is often criticized is its visuals, and I agree with that. The Saturn and PlayStation were capable of putting tons of color on screen with large and beautiful sprites, yet we get some tiny pre-rendered graphics here that aren't a very big upgrade over the Super Nintendo original, if any at all. It was published by Interplay, who got Beam Software to do the honors, who also did the Saturn port of Gex. I'm not sure these guys understood just how much 2D visual power they had at their fingertips, because this game could have looked loads better. Visuals aside, it's still a hell of a good playing game with tons of puzzles and replay value. Prices are all over the place for this one, sometimes as cheap as $30 to as much as $100. It was never released in Japan. Amok was an early 1997 release that was developed by Lemon and published by Scavenger. It's a third-person mech shooter where you pilot the Slam Bird, a highly mobile robotic death machine armed to the teeth with ways to destroy its enemies. The story is some nonsense about corporate espionage and keeping feuding companies at each other's throat, but it's the gameplay here that's the heart of the experience. Taking place on both land and underwater, your missions are basically to seek out certain locations and wipe them off the face of the planet. The graphics engine is driven by voxels and has a hell of a unique look about it. It does make things look blocky, but the trade-off is a fantastically smooth frame rate that really helps the game play better. The difficulty level of this one can be infuriating, so I do advise finding you some level codes and trying out the other stages to get away from the murky underwater stage that opens the game. Once you get better at combat and navigating the levels, things really do become quite fun, making this often overlooked gem an essential part of the Sega Saturn library. The only other platform that ever saw a version of it was on the PC. Track and field games always held a special place with me because of their incredible competition-based gameplay. Decathlete here was internally developed by Sega's AM3 division and runs in the Saturn's high-res mode at a blistering 60 frames per second. It covers various events such as the 100-meter dash, long jump, and javelin throw, 10 events in total. Gameplay is mostly centered on finger speed and timing, rewarding those that have the best hand-eye coordination. An event like the 100-meter dash is simple button mashing, while something like the javelin throw takes quite a bit of timing. My friends and I played this to death when it hit the Saturn in the summer of 1996, constantly challenging one another's world records and entering our names into their save files. It was infuriating to have a friend's initials sitting in your records, especially at the top, motivating you to spend hours to remove them. This kind of competitive play really drives Decathlete's appeal. So if you have a buddy to play with, you simply cannot go wrong with a game of this caliber. It's called Athlete Kings in the PAL regions, and the Japanese version features an additional character that was removed because he was considered racially insensitive. There's also a Japanese X-Band edition available as well.
On your mark, get set.
Altron, the company responsible for Mighty Hits, developed and released Robo Pit for the Saturn in early 1996. This one-on-one fighting game puts robots into a fully 3D arena to do combat. The gameplay does take some getting used to thanks to the ability to go anywhere in the environment you want at any time. Changing the viewpoint of the character radically changes the feel of this game's gameplay, offering both third-person and first-person battles. This holds up well overall to the PlayStation original visually, with nice polygon models and fully 3D arenas and backgrounds. The real hook of this one is the ability to build and modify your own fighters. Each victory gets you pieces to upgrade your creations, and you'll need to fight your way through 100 other robots to get a chance to defeat the top dog. Things seem to be overly simple at first, basically just bludgeoning your opponents in mad button mashing rages when the fights begin. As you gain new pieces for your robots, things start getting interesting, and the deeper you get into the ranking system, you really need to form strategies to survive. Ass whoopings can come fast against more skilled opposition, and hit and run fighting benefits you incredibly, while its 3D combat will likely feel quaint against the stuff available today. Robo Pit still maintains a charm and easy to get into design that I still think is a worthy pickup. It won't dethrone Virtual On, but certainly can still be a worthwhile experience, especially if you have kids. Don't be afraid of the Japanese version of this game. The vast majority of it is in English and is very easy to play. The list of Capcom goodness on the Saturn extends into dozens of titles, so it's no wonder that Pocket Fighter gets overlooked by so many. The hyper-cute chibi art style likely plays a role as well, but Pocket Fighter here is still a really good game. It was released in mid-1998, late in the Saturn's life and only in Japan. It supports the 4MB extended RAM cartridge, and is an incredibly good-looking game with loads of varied animations and great-looking backgrounds. Outside of its visual appeal, you also get some tried and true Street Fighter mechanics that have been modified and upgraded by its gem system. This system can actually be daunting to newcomers, confusing you as to what it means. You get your normal life and super bar per other games in the series, but you now have 3 additional bars at the bottom of the screen that correspond to your special attacks. These level up into more powerful versions of your special moves as you collect gems, adding to an already impressive arsenal of super attacks. You also get new combos, and a much easier interface than other Street Fighter games, now only having buttons for 1 punch, 1 kick, 1 special, and 1 taunt. This new 4-button gameplay simplifies things and allows each match to be a fireworks display of specials and supers. And this is pretty much the entire draw of Pocket Fighter. It takes some of the strategy of its bigger brothers, mixes it with the wild and wonderful animations it has, and gives you a game you can enjoy with anyone. This is especially helpful for the younger crowds that lack the skill to compete in the more competition-driven games in the series. Best part is, Pocket Fighter isn't grossly expensive, often selling for $30 or less. It's also known as Super Gem Fighter Mini Mix. The Lode Runner series goes back as far as my earliest memories of console gaming, so I was well aware of what it was. When Lode Runner The Legend Returns was released on the Saturn in early 1996, like most people, I paid it little mind. There were bigger fish to fry on the Saturn, which I imagine contributed to it being overlooked by so many. Published by Patra and developed by Game Arts. Yes, I said Game Arts, the same developer that did Gun Griffin, Lunar, and Grandia. This was a new take on the classic formula of action puzzle game, introducing new traps and items you could use in your quest to gain treasure. The visuals here are ultra simple, single screen stages that have tiny sprites and nearly no special effects to speak of. I understand that the original PC game was made to run on everything, but with the newer hardware of the time, this could have been made to look much better. What it lacks in graphical impressiveness, it more than makes up for in gameplay variation and challenge. There are a ton of levels in this one, and they get steadily harder and more complex as things go on. The object of each stage is to collect all the treasure and get to the exit without getting yourself killed. You are pursued by a bunch of mini Terminators that will stop at nothing to kill your ass. Luckily, you have traps and abilities to help you escape their tireless efforts. This was preceded by another game in the series, Lode Runner Extra, which added over 100 more levels for you to play. This isn't going to win any awards for thrills or graphics, but for fans of puzzle games, you should find this one quite pleasing. Our last game is the Sega-made F1 Challenge, released in late 1995 in Japan as F1 Live Information. In the absence of a port of the Model 2 masterpiece Indy 500, this is as close as we'd get to that game. And for an early Saturn racing game, it's damn solid too. This was released in Japan just 7 months after Daytona USA, and sports a superior graphics engine in every single way. It's smoother, has less obvious polygon draw-in, and vastly superior texture quality. The gameplay is really good too, giving you custom control over things like the aerodynamics of your car and the types of tires you use. The rear view mirror helps block cars that are trying to pass you, and the alternate soundtrack in the Western version is quite solid. There are licensed racers and tracks here to give you a more authentic experience, and the arcade-style gameplay is easy to come to terms with and perform well. You'll need to put in some effort to be number one though, with pit stops and car tuning playing a big role in your success. Racing game conversions are often dominated by the likes of Sega Rally, Wipeout, and Need for Speed for the Saturn, but F1 Challenge here is more than up to the task of being a worthy addition to your library. I hope you guys enjoyed my episode on Saturn games that are often overlooked. I have always felt that just because a game isn't the best of the best doesn't mean it's without merit. Sometimes a game is good enough or different enough on its own to be worth a play when you're not knee-deep in dragons, flying jesters, and superheroes doing battle. Not everything needs to be a 10 across the board to be enjoyable. There are many more games that could easily fit into this topic, so a part 2 is definitely on the agenda. Feel free to hit me with your recommendations down in the comments. I'm Sega Lord X. Thank you guys for watching, and I will catch you next time.